Dr. Doug Plata, who is a physician in Redlands, California, is also the president and founder of the Space Development Network, which is free to join organization of space advocates. He recently oversaw the completion of a full-scale Moon-Mars base mock-up named InstaBase, which will be used by SpaceX and at major Starship launches. Well, you need to say a bit more about that, I think. But let's do your presentation first, if that's not covered. The floor, the air, and the ether is yours.
Are you able to see my screen?
Nope. I hear you and I see you, but not your screen. There is a little green share screen button at the bottom. There, things are happening.
Are you able to see my screen now?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, there. Now do you see the full screen?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. So the topic of my presentation is why the moon will be settled first. And so I'm making the case for the moon, and a big part of that is why will the moon develop early and quickly, including with settlement. And I'm basically talking in less than 10 years from now. Okay, so I've got sort of a challenge to go ahead and make this case. So let me just go ahead and give you an overview. A key part of this case is making the right definitions. And I think there's, unfortunately, a lot of, amongst space advocates, a lot of bad definitions for settlement. And I think I'd like to try to make that correctment. I'm going to give the example of settlement within North America. And we'll ask the question is, in order to make a settlement, how many people do you need to be able to legitimately call it a settlement? Is it possible to have a settlement before you have children, or is children a requirement for settlement? Do you need profit making before before you can define yourself as a settlement? And then what about a temporary settlement versus permanence? Do you need permanence in order for it to be a settlement? And then I'm going to go ahead and give a context of which the Starship fleet is a major part of that context. And then I'm going to compare it with equatorial low Earth orbit, which is, I think, the best option for settlement in free space is equatorial Leo. And I'm going to go through some of those things. And I'm going to compare to Mars and say, why is it that the moon is going to be settled before Mars? And there's a lot of pretty strong reasons for all of this. I'm going to give some caveats. There are some things that we don't know yet, such as the artificial gravity prescription, that could impact whether settlement is possible in one or another location. Okay, so let's start by the definition of settlement. If you don't have a sort of a common definition, then everybody can define settlement however they want, and Martians can define it the way they want, lunatics can do what they want, and O'Neillians can define it in their favor. So let's go ahead and try to see what is the common term. How is settlement that term? How is it commonly used? Okay, and I'm going to use just the person on the street, using the United States as an example. If you were to ask them, when did the British settle North America? So how do I find out what the common answer to that is? Of course, I turn to Google and I ask the question. And what do you suppose the answer was? When did the British settle North America? It was very specific. It was down to the very day, and that is May 14, 1607. That's a specific date as to when Google says that settlement began by the British in North America. Okay. Okay, so what happened in May 14, 1607? This is when the British ships stopped and they established, they first landed at the location that was going to be Jamestown. And then they built that and it sustained itself and it grew, okay? So for some reason, it doesn't like to advance very easily. So in Jamestown, how many people settled, okay? Initially, it was 104. 104 people landed on that date or within a couple of days of that. But frankly, if it was 50 people or 25 people, we would still look back at that date as when settlement got started in North America, you know, from Europeans. Obviously, there were natives here locally, so it was pre-settled. But in terms of the Europeans, that was the date. Did settlement only start with children? Well, the interesting thing is 1607 was not the date of the first child. When we point to a date in which settlement occurred, we don't typically point to the day when the first child is born. That's not our definition of settlement. Settlement is when people came and they settled down, and that happened before the first child was born. Okay. So say, for example, if you take this image, which I'm sure you guys are all familiar with, this is an image produced by SpaceX, and it's showing what they envision can be accomplished with the Starship. If you ask any normal person that they're not a space advocate with an axe to grind. If you ask any person looking at this picture, would you call this a Martian settlement? They would, of course, say yes. And none of them, no reasonable person would say, well, before I answer that, are there children born there? No. If you have a large group of people, they have sold their homes on Earth, they've literally settled down, even before the artificial gravity prescription is determined to see if they can have children, people would look at this and say, that sure looks like a settlement to me, okay? So we should be reasonable in our definitions. Does the definition require profitability? Okay, so I've heard many people say, many space advocates say, and I'm sure many of you have heard this too, that unless it is able to turn a profit somehow, then it doesn't qualify as a settlement. It might be a base or something, but it can't be a settlement. Got to have profitability. Okay. Well, let me ask you this: is the United States currently, is it profitable, or are we spend more money than we receive? Well, unfortunately, our national debt is going up. So do we not qualify as a settlement, even though we're a country? Profitability is not a requirement. Okay. Also, Sun City. So Sun City is a city. It's sort of in the suburbs of Phoenix, Northwest. I forget, there's something like 30,000 people there. It's certainly a community. I think it can legitimately be called a city. But the unique thing about this is a retirement town. You cannot live there unless you are 55 years of age or older, okay? And so the question is Sun City profitable? I mean, they've existed for decades. They keep growing, so they're certainly sustainable, but are they profitable? Well, let me ask you this. Do they turn a profit? Do they mine precious group metals, and that's how they support themselves? Are they an inventor's colony, and is that how they're able to support themselves? Or maybe do they conduct a reality TV show and support themselves? They do none of that. So if they're not turning a profit, how in the world can they build these homes, purchase them, continue to make payments until they die? Okay, how do they do that? It's done through a couple ways. Well, Social Security provides some revenue for them, but primarily it is savings that they have made during their life, and now they didn't retire to turn a profit. They are spending money in their retirement. And that's just the normal way that it's done. Okay. So as we take a look at, let's call it Elon City on Mars, how would it be funded? Is it going to be some mining, some resource that they're going to figure out that they can develop trade with Earth, and that's what's going to make it work? No. My belief is going to start with space budgets, meaning international space budgets, the space budgets of different countries. And as the per seat price goes down dramatically, thanks to Starship, and especially if there's reusability, then the people with the deepest pockets will be able to purchase the first seats that are more expensive. And as the flat rate goes up, the per seat price is going to go down. So who in this world has the deepest pockets? It's countries, not wealthy individuals. Countries are much more wealthy than even their wealthiest individuals. And then so that's for people moving to Mars, or in this case, the moon. And then as the per seat price goes down and wealthy private individuals are able to pay to go and pay to settle down, then I think mostly it's private savings. And this is the major sources of revenue that will make it work. Certainly there will be some companies that will turn a profit. You know, companies don't stay in business unless they do turn a profit. But are they doing it through trade of material resources? No, they're getting their money from these sources, okay? So you don't have to make external profit in order to sustain yourself. You can sustain yourself by money made either through taxation or probably the majority case through money made in markets on Earth in previous years. And private individuals save up that money and then they spend it to settle on the moon and Mars, okay? What about permanence? Is permanence necessary for the definition of settlement? Okay, Jamestown in 1609, did it become permanent? Yes, and we point to it in saying 1609 was the day, okay? But several years before, there was Roanoke, and it was a temporary thing, and the colony, something happened to them and they disappeared. And when we asked Google, when was their settlement by British, the answer is not 1587, it's 1609. So permanence is recognized as a requirement for settlement. Or for that matter, you could go back to Eric, what was his face? Not Eric the Red, no, not Eric. It was, I forget the Viking's name. Eric.
Leif Erikson.
Leif Erikson, thank you. And we know from tree dating, it was the year 1021. But why do we not, if you Google and say, when was North America settled by Europeans? They don't say 1021. And the reason is because, yes, the Vikings visited, but they didn't settle down, okay? It didn't lead to anything permanent. So permanence is a requirement, in my opinion, okay? So here is my practical definition of what is settlement. And then after we have this definition, then we can go ahead and see where will off-Earth settlement occur first. Off-Earth settlement is when people sell their homes on Earth, settle down, and their settlement is sustained and grows. I think that's a pretty simple definition, okay? What this definition does not specifically require, but it would be nice as a later goal, okay? We don't point to a settlement and say it didn't become a settlement until it reached 20,000 or 50,000. So it's when it starts is when you have the first people arrive and they settle down and to a location that became permanent. You don't actually require profitability. It would be absolutely nice. It's something that we would try to achieve, but you don't have to find out some sort of trade mechanism to sustain yourself, okay? Money can come from savings. You don't have to have children. It's certainly an absolutely nice goal, but we see from Sun City, those people are too old to be having children, and yet that settlement or that city is sustaining itself. So technically you don't need children, although it would be definitely a goal worth pursuing. And you also don't need Earth independence. I mean, what country on Earth has no trade with anybody else? They're totally self-sufficient. We don't require that in any definition for cities or nations or anything like that. It's not a technical requirement for settlement, although that would be nice for its own goals. Okay, so here's the context. The context is the Starship fleet, and I think this is what's so significant. So it starts with Starship. And it's not just a Starship, but it is the fleet. And I think we can be pretty confident about this based on the engine production rate currently and reasonable increase in engine production rate in the near-term future. SpaceX is producing one Raptor 2 engine every day, which means every 9 days they have enough to produce another upper stage Starship. And so the fleet is going to make a difference. And so the goal, Elon's goal is by 2030 is to achieve 1,000 Starships. And I think that SpaceX is actually on goal on the path to reaching that goal. So let's get to the question. Where will the first off-Earth settlement be? I'm going to suggest three possible locations: equatorial Leo, the Moon, and Mars. I'm going to leave off asteroids. I just don't think even the asteroid people think that will be the first place that off-Earth settlement will occur. Okay, so let's sort of go through these. The advantages of equatorial Leo is that it's obviously a short travel time. Time delay is short, but it's similar to the Moon in terms of verbal communication back and forth. Beautiful views, I'm putting that in parentheses because equatorial Leo is just the equator, okay? And then there's full G. Arguably, the most significant advantage is being able to provide a full G, okay? But there are significant disadvantages. The lack of immediate physical resources. You got to import it somehow. And that importation has to go through a high delta V if you're getting it from the Earth. You're expending a whole bunch of propellant, 9.5 to 10 kilometers per second, to be able to get resources up to Leo to be able to build your huge settlement. So if the question is where are we going to settle first? In order to get on an alien settlement, typically these things are considered to be very huge, and you don't typically start a settlement with the huge product. There's medium solar power, and by that I mean that in equatorial Leo, you are going through nighttime on the Earth every 90 minutes, I believe. And so there's a disadvantage there compared with the Moon, at the poles of the Moon. It is within telerobotic reach, but there is the big issue is orbital debris, which I think is a deal killer for near-term and maybe intermediate-term settlement of equatorial Leo. Okay, Mars, it has certain advantages. It has very accessible resources. It also has very large amount of resources, although I'm putting that in parentheses because I don't think that's a particular advantage for Mars, and I'll explain why. It has excellent tourism, the biggest volcano, the biggest canyon. It has a 24.5-hour day. So all those are definitely advantages. But there are disadvantages. The long travel time, and I'll explain why I think a trip to Mars is going to be significantly more expensive than the trip to the Moon, or for that matter, equatorial Leo. It is not safely close to the Earth. If something bad happens, you can't quickly return to the Earth like you can from Leo or from the Moon. It also has medium solar power in that it also has night, and it has about 1/2 of the solar radiation at that distance from the sun. And I'm going to emphasize this, and that is disconnected from the Earth in terms of the speed of light communication delay. Okay, the advantage of the Moon is that it has short travel time, relatively short. It has abundant physical resources, and I'm just going to say right here that for a recycling settlement on the Moon, it requires relatively little input of the volatiles, which is what's lacking at the Moon. And yet from the L-cross results, there's a substantial proportion of those volatiles is ammonia with its nitrogen and the carbon containing chemicals. And if you're not familiar with the L-cross results, I've developed a visual illustration to illustrate how much volatiles there are, including carbon and nitrogen. If you go to developspace.info/L-cross, all lowercase, you'll find that representation. It's within telerobotic reach. and it is connected to Earth in terms of its time delay for communications. However, the disadvantages are that the resources are more difficult to secure than Mars, and that is true. There is only 1/6 gravity, so it's sort of the least gravity of them all. And let's be honest, there's, in terms of visual, if you have a window and you're looking outside, it's more beautiful orbiting the Earth, and it's more beautiful than Mars. It's sort of the least beautiful of the three, so that's a factor. So let's do some highlighted comparisons. In terms of equatorial Leo, think it through, the cost of transport. This is an argument that O'Neillians make, but let's stop and think about it. If you want to get 100 kilograms or 100 liters of water to Leo, what do? You launch the 100 kilograms of water, and just for discussion's sake, let's say it's $10,000 per kilogram. That comes to $1 million for that container of water, okay? Now, to go to the moon or Mars, it's about the same in terms of transport costs. It's different, okay? But it can be done in this way. You can have, let's say, 3 units of propellant that you need to ship 1 unit of, I'm going to say, a spare part. Let's just say it's a motor. And what does that motor do? That motor keeps a ice harvester operational. Okay, so like, for example, if you ship 3 kilograms and that's used to push 1 kilogram to the lunar surface and land it, and then that 1 kilogram goes into a 10 kilogram ice harvester, and then that ice harvester harvests 100 kilograms of water before a motor wears out and it needs to be replaced. So by shipping 1 kilogram of spare parts, you're able to get 100 kilograms of product. And it turns out the result is about $40,000 for the 100 kilograms. When you do the math, it's about 25 times more expensive to ship stuff to low Earth orbit than to the moon or Mars, because the moon and Mars has resources available there, and if you have a way to be able to harvest that, you don't have to ship it. So frankly, the shipping cost of Leo, I'm really not convinced that that's an argument for Leo, for consumables, I should say. Now, so I think that the nearness to Earth is not a particular advantage. What about the views? Well, equatorial Leo, and this is selected because of the relatively low radiation. Look how much water there is, and look how few countries it goes over. Is this? Yes, it's more beautiful, but it's, anybody who lives outside of that line is never going to see their home country. So the views is beautiful, but it's not as strong an argument as if it was an inclined orbit. But the moment you go inclined, you go through the Southern Atlantic anomaly, and you get all that radiation, and that's a problem for settlement. So I wouldn't say views is a particularly strong argument in favor. Full G is a question. Now, what I would say is that for initial settlement, you can have, like Sun City, you can have adults that go ahead and settle down and establish a settlement. And you don't need to solve the gravity prescription in order to start settlement. But what I'd say is, can adults live out the rest of their life in hypogravity? We can have indoor centrifuges, we can get up to a full G, but not 24/7. People are not, that's not reasonable for people to be in the centrifuge 24/7. So I'm actually going to go ahead and put this as a question mark. It is possible that if we get there and we use some artificial gravity and it's just not sufficient, it may be that we will have to wait until we can establish O'Neillian cylinders to be able to provide the full G 24/7. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I don't think so, but I can't rule this out completely. Okay, so that is the one, in my opinion, the one remaining argument. But orbital debris, man, this is real problematic because something as large as a settlement is going to be punctured on a pretty routine basis. And if you have to wait until you clear out Leo in order to settle it, then that's a pretty strong argument against it. Let me try to speed things up here. Mars, excellent tourism, but that's probably not going to be the defining thing that determines whether people are willing to go. The 24.5-hour day, but you need to cover. Okay, so you can have lights indoors in a lunar settlement that has, 12 hours light, 12 hours dark, and for growing plants, I'm going to put a question mark there because people need to be inside and protected from the radiation from the galactic cosmic rays. So I'm going to put a question mark as to whether that's really a significant advantage or not. Yes, the large amount of resources. If you're on the moon, there's a tremendous amount of resources actually in looking at like the water. So if Mars has a whole bunch more, yes, that's nice, but in the long run, not the near term. And if you recycle significantly, like we're doing on the ISS, the resources on the moon will last for a very long time. So I don't think that's a defining thing. The easily accessible resources, initially you're going to be launching habitats, and you're going to be, there's not going to be a difference. You're going to have to go ahead and launch this stuff. And with recycling, the easily accessible resources isn't such a big thing. Okay, now here's the deal killers, I think, for Mars. And that is the long travel time results in a more expensive ticket. And that's because you can fit many more people in a ship going to the moon than you go to Mars, because you got to have all those provisions you need to give them elbow room on the way to Mars. And so how big is this? It's huge. Mars, you can't reuse the ship until the next Earth-Mars window opens. So that's 26 months or 793 days. On the moon, it takes about 11 days to do the round trip. You divide those two, it's a 72-fold factor. It's a large number of round trips that you can do on the moon compared to going to Mars. And that's going to dramatically affect the ticket price. And I think that's just a huge factor that cannot be ignored, okay? And also, this is sort of important. If you go to the moon, well, if you're in the moon or Leo, you can be telepresent with family at Thanksgiving or graduations or wedding. On Mars, the best you can do is to send a video email. And so I think that that's going to weigh pretty significantly on the minds of the people who are deciding where they will go. So in the last couple minutes, let me say this is how I think the moon is going to be settled. We're going to have Starship, and not just Starship, but a fleet. Yes, we probably will have a short Artemis program, but after that, I would like to propose an InstaBase, a small initial permanent base, completely inflatable, with an initial permanent crew. And these people are settlers if they have sold their homes on Earth, if they live off Earth on the moon for as long as they can. They come with their families, which in this case would be couples. And then after that, Starship delivers very large specialty HABs, and we develop this much larger settlement. And so for that reason, I think that these people are going to be the first settlers, and I think it's going to be the moon. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Doug. And we do have time for a very quick question, if there is someone. Question, comment? I should be able to have something. Ben.
Yes. No, that was a good presentation. I don't really have any questions about it. I think that I like your definition of settlement, where it removes a lot of the stuff that normally people talk about: profitability, size. I agree that those aren't necessary. Even children, that's the goal, but not necessary for a settlement.
I kind of think that the children are necessary for a settlement, but it won't define the start.
Well, I think if you call it a settlement, I think intention is the primary thing. Are people going there to live permanently? That should be the definition of a settlement.
Another way of saying permanently is that they're settling down, which, you know,
Mhm.
means settlement.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the intention is permanent. I mean, the reality may not be, but you know, when most people settle down, they're like, I'm going to be here for the duration. I think that should be the definition of a settlement. Do they intend to be there for the duration, whether it happens or not?
Yeah, I do agree with that. But also with the permanence, I think that is
Mhm.
you know, that's the way we use the term here on Earth. So I think
Right.
that should be included. And
Well,
the
thank you for that, and
Okay.
we need to welcome the next speaker.
Right.
It was very good and
Good presentation. Thanks, Doug.
presentation. Yeah, thank you.
thanks, guys.